G'day painters, today we're once more in the old world working on my dwarves, and that's the Shieldbearers. Let's get to it. As always, my dwarves are started from purple to allow for purple to be the universal shadow colour across my entire army. These guys were started from Diabolic Plum through the airbrush. And then the first step is, with plate mail, I blocked in all the metal parts. This is the axe, the helmet, the scale mail, the plate armour, and their wrist guards. I wanted the shield to be metal, but I wanted it to be a different shade, so I used Cobalt Metal for the shield, which has a nice blue tint to it. I also made sure to do the handles that are in their hands as Cobalt Metal too, because these are part of the shield. There are a few parts that are metal which I didn't want to be a silver or a gold, so for these I used rough iron. This is mostly the weapon handles, but also some random cups and tankards on some of them. Next it was time for the weird reddy browny metal colour that I've been using on my dwarfs. This is a 50-50 mix of Flesh Terror's Red and Contrast Medium over the plate mail from earlier. I used this on all the scale mail parts on them. This colour was something I found by mistake when working on my Rune Lord, and it's now become a core part of my colour scheme. It's funny how that can happen when you're painting an army. An accident just turns into a core part of it. Then it was time to move away from the metallics for a bit, and the first non-metallic colour was Dark Sky for the cloth. I should point out that this video is only showing the shield bearers themselves. I have them magnetized so I can put on like the different kings or the BSB or even Queen Helga. So rather than pick one of them randomly to include in this video, I figure I'll just paint the shield bearers, then some of the heroes can get their own videos when I decide which ones deserve their own videos. There isn't really much room to get red onto these guys, which is my second army colour next to the blue, so I decided to use it for this one guy's tome. At least it gets some red onto the model, even if it isn't that much. As always, because the Vampire Red that is the base colour for my red recipe doesn't cover well, I use Basilisk Red first to give a nice colour to build the reds on. It covers nicely in one coat rather than the 17 coats the Vampire Red takes. Then of course, once the Basilisk Red is done, I go over it with Vampire Red, getting a much quicker and smoother finish than if I tried to build straight up from Vampire Red. Two of the guys have casks that they're carrying around. Lugging some old dude around on a shield is thirsty work after all. For these casks, I used oak brown for the wood. Next it was the skin, and it won't shock anyone that has watched my other dwarf videos, but I used Topaz Skin for this. I intentionally went and bought more skin tones to give me some variety to use, and I still find myself coming back to Topaz Skin for all my dwarfs. It's just a really nice skin tone for dwarves, so I guess my entire dwarf army has the exact same skin tone. For the pages on the book I use pale sand. One of the guys has rope holding his cask and tankard, so I used Tomb King Tan for the rope. I feel like there was rope on another model, but I don't see it on them now they're finished, and I can't see any footage of doing it. So maybe I'm going crazy, but if you're painting these guys and find more rope, then do it at this step too. Next, it was time for the best part of painting dwarfs, the beards. I gave them 3 different beards, but I'm only going to show one in detail, and then the other 2 briefly, just to show the colours I used. So the guy with the tome I decided would likely be the oldest and the leader of the Shieldbearers, so he gets a nice white beard. Starting with ash grey, I block in the majority of the beard, but leaving the purple in the deepest recesses and shadowed parts as our shadow colour. Then with white, I repeat the previous step, but in smaller areas inside the spots I established already. One important thing to remember here is that not everything that is grey also needs to have some white on it. If it's a small part in a recess or facing downward, then it's okay to leave it grey without any white. Think of the grey as a highlight colour for the shadowed areas rather than just the first step of highlighting. Then with bold titanium white, I finish the beard with the final highlights on the most raised and upward facing parts. If you don't have bold titanium white, then I'd just do an extra layer or 2 of your white from the previous step, just to make sure the highest points are the most punchy white that you can get them. For the beards on the other 2 guys, I stepped down in colour for each. So the next one was starting from deep grey, leaving the purple in the shadows, and the third was starting from black. For this guy, I did the beard all over. The purple in the shadows doesn't look right because the black is just so much darker. Then it was ash grey for number 2 and deep grey for number 3. And then white and ash grey to finish off the highlights for each of them respectively. I wanted the shield bearers to all be a bit older and more experienced. I feel like you wouldn't entrust your king or standard bearer to new upcoming dwarves. So I wanted them all to have some type of white or grey beard, but wanted them to read differently. Offsetting each beard by a step accomplishes that. They're all obviously older and more experienced, while the beards all still read differently. Next for the belts, pouches and random straps, it's leather brown. There are a lot of random straps and pouches around these guys, so make sure you give them a second look to check that you didn't miss any. Now that all the colours are finally blocked in, it's time to do the gold. As normal, the reason I left the gold to the last step is because the gold's on top of so many other colours, and I find it way easier to do the gold after these colours, rather than trying to dodge the gold when doing those colours. The 2 main gold parts are the filigree on the armour and the helmet, and then the decorative armour draping around their shoulders. There are a few other parts around the models that should be gold too, things like the filigree on the tome or on one of the tankards. Again, just give each one a second look to see if there's anything you've missed that you'd like to be gold. Now that everything else is blocked in, there are a couple of spots I want to go back to with the plate mail. Things like the braces on the casques and the buckles on the pouches and straps. Time to build the shadows. With purple tone, I work around the model building the shadows. I alternate between doing a full wash on some parts like the gold, a very thin down wash on things like the skin, and also building shadows in very specific spots on parts that would get too discoloured like the metal. I'm using one wash here, but the way you use it really changes the effects on the final product, so play around with the wash a bit to get the result that you're looking for. I knew I was using Necromancer Cloak next, which is what I'd do the pupils on the eyes with, so I did the white for the eyes first. Look at me getting things done in the right order for once. Aren't you proud? With Necromancer Cloak, I dotted the pupils first, then worked around the models, blocking in all the gems. Most of the gems are on the decorative shoulder armour and the helm, but there was at least one on a beard if I remember right, so just, again, make sure you take your time checking each model. These are the colour pairs I used for the gems. I put them all on my palette and started working on the gems. I'm not going to show me painting each colour, the steps are the same for every one of them, and it'd get too long. The first step is to block in the bottom 2/3 of each gem with the darker colour of a colour pair. Then block in the bottom third of each gem with the lighter colour of that pair. And finally, with white, do a tiny dot at the top of the gem and a slightly bigger dot inside the lighter colour at the bottom. Highlighting these guys is a bit tricky. Half the model is going to be under the shield and in shadow. So each step of the way when I'm doing the highlights, I'm grabbing the shield to check if something would be shadowed if I'm not sure about it. For the skin, it's Tourmaline Skin. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that right, or even what Tourmaline is. But I don't need to for me to use the paint. For the leather highlights, it's a 50-50 mix of leather brown and ice yellow. When doing the highlights for leather, I always do some small scratchy highlights too. This gives that broken and worn texture that you expect to see on leather. For the wood, it's fur brown. I'm mostly doing an edge highlight here, but I do add in a little bit of texture by following where the grain would be. And while I highlight the wood, why don't you give the video a like? And hit that subscribe button while you're down there too. This channel is slowly growing and it'd be great if you joined us on our journey as we keep growing. So hit that subscribe button to keep up to date with my videos. The tone will be under the shield and in shadow, but I don't want it to look just one note. There's still a difference in light, even in shadows, so I use Dragon Red to do some highlights. I do stop there rather than going all the way up to pure red like I normally do for my red recipe. Then with deep blue, I start the highlights for the blues. For the blue that is under the shield, this will be the final highlight, just like the red. I only take it further for the blues that are out where they'd be getting hit by the light. This is the point where I decided to glue them all together. Every highlight from this point on is only in locations that aren't under the shield, so I figured it was a good time to glue them together. Which it was, with one exception. Do the runes on the weapons first. You'll see why when I get to them later, but trust me, do the runes first. Now they're together, I can also show you how all my kings and BSB are magnetized to sit on the shield. And of course the great Queen Helga. What dwarf throng doesn't want to be led to battle by a queen on Shieldbearers? I'm actually pretty keen to field her like that at some point. As you can see, I screwed up the magnetizing a bit. I needed to raise one side because the shield is round and the feet of most of the heroes are flat, so they weren't sitting right, but I really botched the job with the green stuff and it looks terrible. Thankfully, once a character's sitting on it, you can't really tell. Back to the highlighting, and it's Ultramarine Blue to finish the blues. This is just an edge highlight on the raised parts that are facing upwards. For highlighting the silver, it's Mithril. As always, just picking out the raised parts and the parts facing upwards. With them all glued together and on their base now, it's pretty easy to see the parts that should be highlighted. Then the final highlight is Greedy Gold for the golds. Most of this is highlighting on the shield. For the outside filigree, it's really easy to just run the side of your brush along it to pick out the raised parts. For the gold parts on the centre part of the shield, just sit one of your heroes and see what would be in shadows and what should be highlighted. Now for the part I mentioned earlier, the runes on the weapons. The first step is really watering down a wire and just letting it flow into the runes. The only reason this gets difficult at all is the runes on the inside are a pain to reach properly. If these guys weren't together, there'd be no struggles doing this at all. Next step is Bad Moon Yellow Contrast. With this I cover the entire runes. I also go outside the lines with it to create an OSL glow from the runes. Then I break out Magmadroth Flame Contrast, and I'm only putting this inside the runes. I don't want to go outside the lines with this. I'm only using the yellow as the glow, and not the orange. I'm also leaving the yellow in the corner of the runes, not taking the orange all the way to the ends. Then with Baal Red Contrast, I just pick out some spots inside the runes, mostly where the branches join each other and the thicker parts. I'm not entirely happy with how the runes came out. I was frustrated with myself for not doing them before I put the model together, and how annoying it was trying to get into the inside runes, and I just didn't take my time and give them the effort they deserve. It's definitely a point I should go back and fix when I'm in the right headspace for it. And they're finished. And since Queen Helga is finished too, you get to see her on them. I like the way these guys came out, but I definitely took some shortcuts on them which I'm not too happy about. It's such a cool model, and really it's one of the only real centerpiece models dwarves get. They definitely deserved more time and attention. However, once again I found myself painting to a deadline for an event. I only got these guys finished the night before the event, again. Maybe I need to take a break from events for a while so I can give models the time they deserve instead of always rushing. In the end, they look good on the table, and that's the most important thing, and what we really care about. I'm also starting to run out of dwarf units and models to paint. I still have a few, but at some point I'm going to have to choose a new old world army to paint. I enjoy painting 40k, but the nostalgia from painting old world is hard to beat. So I think I'll probably start another old world army project to keep that nostalgia rolling. If you have suggestions for what army you'd like to see me paint, drop a comment below. If you've made it this far, the assumption would be that you've enjoyed the video, so why not give it a like? And if you want to see more dwarves from me, or some of my 40k stuff, hit that subscribe button to keep up to date with my videos. Thanks for watching, catch you in the next video.